In the high-altitude deserts of northern Argentina, off-roaders have spent years searching for a virgin mountain pass. They want a direct connection from the famous Route 40 to the massive caldera of the Galán volcano. Route 40 served as the starting point. The true objective lay roughly 100 kilometers to the west, entirely off the grid. Between the pavement and the volcano sits the Puna, a landscape of cracked earth, dry salt flats, and jagged canyons where roads do not exist. To cross it, a group calling themselves the Colifas assembled a fleet of 8 modified 4x4s, divided into teams named Tequil and Compuel. They were driving into terrain mapped by satellites, but untested by human travel. At 4,000 meters, any mechanical failure would leave them stranded without hope of outside rescue. The journey began in the lush valleys and vineyards around Tafí del Valle and Cafayate. Before they even reached the dirt, the lead Toyota began leaking oil from its rear differential. A local shop in Cafayate provided a desperate solution. The mechanic used unshielded bearings that were close enough in size, pressing them into the axle to keep the convoy moving. The repair saved the trip, but it was a warning. If the trucks were failing on smooth pavement, the physical stress of the Puna would be significantly higher. Leaving the roads behind, the teams pushed into the mountains. The ground quickly gave way to dry riverbeds, deep sand, and steep, rocky inclines. The tuck-wheel team tried to navigate the river valleys, but the canyons narrowed until they were blocked by thick brush and rock walls. They were forced to backtrack through territory only fit for mules. As the sun set, the situation deteriorated. They navigated blindly through 10-foot-tall thorny brush, using their headlights to illuminate the edges of steep ravines. The environment began to take a physiological toll. In negative 10-degree temperatures and 10% humidity, nasal passages dried out and bled. Between the freezing wind and the thin air, the altitude made sleep impossible. At this height, technology provides little comfort. The thin air and harsh conditions turn a logistical driving challenge into a struggle for survival. At dawn, the teams reunited at an isolated stone outpost. The people living there survived entirely off the grid, traveling exclusively on horseback and raising guanacos. The locals delivered the final verdict. The pass they were searching for was a full day's journey by mule. It was impassable for trucks. The expedition had reached its limit. The descent back to civilization was brutal. Constant drops and rock impacts tore the vehicles apart. On one Cherokee, impacts snapped the steering box bolts one by one, killing steering control. By the switchbacks, the Jeep's rear suspension completely collapsed under the pounding. The repairs became desperate. They patched tires with metal screws and glue. When the steering failed again, they lashed the bumper to the frame using steel winch cables, just to keep the wheels pointing forward. Success in the High Puna is measured by the ability to keep a machine running with scraps and sheer willpower. Exhausted, the teams finally returned to the gravel sections of Route 40 late at night. They were just hours from safety. On a negative camber curve, a driver error combined with the choice to stay in two-wheel drive led to a loss of traction. The Jeep spun sideways, caught the dirt, and flipped into the air. It rolled completely over, landed on its wheels, and then plummeted backward into a dark ravine. The rest of the convoy scrambled down into the darkness. They found a debris field of gear and vehicle parts scattered across the slope. The outcome was miraculous. The soft soil prevented the roof from crushing, and because the men inside were wearing their seatbelts, they walked away without a single scratch. Survival in a rollover depends on technical safety and favorable terrain. Richard and Dario walked away because they wore their belts and the slope was soft enough to absorb the impact. An hour after the crash, the crew was sitting in a hotel in Cafayate, eating roast goat and pouring local wine. The next morning, a local mechanic named Luis spent 7 hours hammering the mangled Jeep back into driving condition for only 40 pesos. They never found the Colifa Pass. The route they attempted was impossible, and the expedition failed its primary objective. Pushing a team to the point of mechanical and physical collapse creates a bond that remains long after the engines cool. The expedition defined their limits, leaving them with a story to tell for the rest of their lives.